Welcome to Conscious Marketing Movement podcast, where we bring you thought-provoking conversations to challenge traditional marketing practices and inspire a new paradigm, shaping the future of marketing for a better tomorrow. In our first season, we'll explore how can marketing drive climate action. We'll be talking with sustainability communicators, brand strategists, designers, all sharing their knowledge and first-hand experiences. So whether you're listening to us at home with your favorite beverage or on your daily commute, make yourself comfortable and enjoy the episode. Okay, welcome to Conscious Marketing Movement podcast. Today our guests are climate tech marketing fairies, as they call them, Amelia Zimmerman and Meg Kendall. They founded a marketing agency, Climate Hub, providing marketing and communication services for climate tech companies. Welcome to Conscious Marketing Movement podcast, ladies.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for finding time to talk to us and kind of diving deep into conscious marketing and what role us marketers and brands have to play when it comes to climate crisis. I feel like with a lot of people, and myself included, that work in climate space, they have this kind of shifting moment in their life. Something happened when it shifted their awareness that, oh my God, we're actually in a huge crisis here. It's bigger than anything we've known up until now. Oh my God, what we're going to do about this. So did you have that moment and what was it? Or was it more like a gradual process?
I had worked in different industries on different kinds of projects. None of it really felt like it really meant anything. But I had learned a lot of skills working on those projects that I then realized I could continue on in a kind of B2B corporate setting, but still actually work on the climate crisis. So that was it for me. But Meg, I'm not sure about you.
Yeah, so it was both. It was gradual, but there was also like a point in my life where I was like, okay, I need to do something different. I always wanted to be involved in sustainability and climate types of things, but I never really understood how to make it work from a financial standpoint, which I'm sure many people probably have had that experience as well. But really the moment that I actually was able to switch over to focusing on climate and writing and all the things I care so deeply about now was after I had my daughter, because I was working a job that I hated, and then I had my daughter, and I was like, how uninspiring for a kid to like see her mom working a job that she hates. So that was really the thing that put like a fire under my butt, I guess I would say. And then, yeah, I dove right into, at first I was looking at sustainability, but I was really interested in climate tech because I like the complexity of it. And because my dad growing up was a real big giant tech nerd. So I had a little bit of like nostalgia at it too, because I just know that he would be so geeked out by all the like amazing tech that we have today.
I guess having a child is such a life-changing experience that makes you look at the world and what you do and the jobs that you're choosing even more. It brings this like huge extra layer and also extra responsibility. So when was the moment when you both came together, said, right, okay, we have these skills, we had separate journeys, but we're going to join this and we're going to create Climate Hub?
Yeah, so we were both freelancing in the climate space as writers. And we did that for sort of a few years independently. I found Meg fairly early on, and I saw her LinkedIn profile and I thought, oh no, she looks really good. So she was on my radar as a person to watch, and I think we reached out and we chatted. And then we would sort of share clients occasionally and just kind of work collaboratively. And then towards the end of last year, we decided let's do a report on the current state of climate tech marketing, because we both work across so many clients. We have so many insights. Let's come together and produce this. And that report turned into a content newsletter. And then eventually we just said we can do so much more for the climate tech companies out there if we come together. Yes. So that's how it happened.
Amazing. And for how long have you been running now?
I mean, it's been a kind of a gradual journey, but I would say this year has been us working together.
The report was published in January, and that's what really kicked everything off. So about a year now, officially.
Can you tell our listeners more about this report? Because I have seen it and I have downloaded it, but for those who haven't seen it, can you just maybe introduce the report and the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, so I had the idea for a while. I really wanted to put out like a state of the industry report, just because there wasn't really anything out there like that for climate tech, at least that was specific to marketing. And it just seemed like a really
Mhm.
It's something that could be like a very helpful asset to the community. But I was never going to get it over the line by myself. And I actually, Amelia, it's funny because we were just misremembering who reached out to who first, and we were both half correct. Because I had reached out to Amelia, but then she was the first one to ask for a chat. And then a couple months later, she was like, we were just talking about how sometimes freelancing can be a lonely thing. And I was like, you know what? For the longest time, I've actually really been wanting to do this report. I was like, do you want to work on this report with me? And so that's how it started. But yeah, it was actually a really fun process. We actually reached out to like 20 plus climate tech marketers at fairly well known companies in the space to interview them one on one and get their insights on like what they think is working in climate tech, what they see going forward, like what worked best for them as far as like lead generation and collaborating and just making relationships in the space. So it was really cool to have that primary data to inject into the report, and it was pretty well received, and it was a fun project to do too. So, and we got our Canva design skills supercharged. At least I did, because it was my first time trying to do it.
Amazing. Yeah, it's one of the skills that marketers know you want it or not, but you've got to nail Canva.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you say that the brands now is kind of the new phase of climate education, and this is why I would like to unpack in more detail today. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So this is kind of a fun one because it's kind of a little bit, it's interesting, but it's a little sad too, right? Like no one wants to hear that brands are the face of climate education. So we think there's two pieces to this. One being like sort of B2C, so more like consumer facing aspect of it, and then there's the B2B aspect of it. And we'll start with the B2C kind of aspect. So brands market their products as eco-friendly or sustainable or biodegradable, etc. And the average person when they're in the store, what happens is they're looking to information from these brands to determine whether they're making good purchasing decisions, like whether what they're doing is good for the planet, good for the health of the environment, etc. And when they see something on a package, they just have to take it at face value. They assume the brand is telling the truth. They assume that, they're doing the best they can in terms of climate impact, environmental impact, etc. And so that's what they take to be like good action. They're like, this is a thing that's appropriate to buy. I'm going to buy it and I'm doing my part for the planet. But really, it's so much more complicated than that. And sometimes brands are trying, but they're not telling the full story. But what's interesting about it is that Amelia and I were just talking about this, how it's kind of like a mental model. Robert Cialdini talks about this thing called click run in his book Influence that most marketers out there will know about. And it's just speaking about how we're faced with so much sensory input every day that there's no way you can take the time to process everything and figure out like whether this is a good choice and whether this is a bad choice. So we take these mental shortcuts, and one of those things is seeing like a green package or something that says eco-friendly. We just have to assume it's good and we run with it. Our brain goes click and we run with it and buy it and think we did a good thing. So that's sort of where we're coming from like a B2C standpoint. I don't know if Amelia, you want to take the B2B point of view.
Yeah, so I think B2C is what captures a lot of the public attention with like the big greenwashing scandals, because consumers are, it's kind of easy to mislead them, unfortunately, given how little time anyone has to go and do their own research and validate things. But it's a slightly different story in the B2B world, and we think it's actually a little more inspiring in the B2B world. So a lot of the clients that we work with and their clients are inspired by and looking up to the big corporate leaders out there, like the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Salesforce, the Apples, who are making big climate commitments. And oftentimes, and we think they're probably not doing this enough, but oftentimes they're actually laying bare their strategies. They're talking about which carbon projects they're investing in. They're talking about how they're decarbonizing. They're really trying to lift up whole industries. And we think that, they've now found themselves in another role that they probably didn't realize either. They are leading the corporate sector on what best practice looks like for decarbonization, because no one else is stepping up to do this. The governments are lagging behind. Even the international organizations are often one step behind what the companies themselves are actually just going out and doing. So that's sort of another element of this, and it's probably a happier story than the consumer story right now.
The consumer story is a little bit sad because of the lack of time that you mentioned. And also it's just really easy to manipulate people. I have a story from my friend just yesterday who's very conscious and careful and buys eco products. And then she bought this cosmetic product and was like, oh my God, there's like beef parts in it. She's like, how can I know?
Yeah, this is ultimately the big problem with greenwashing is not that a few people get misled, but that an entire society gets disillusioned with any of this messaging whatsoever. And so they will eventually see a green package and a normal package and say, this is probably not true anyway, so I'm just going to go with the normal package, you know?
Right.
So
So what can we do as marketers to, I guess, stop this, to improve this?
It all just comes back to being very careful with the language you choose to use and not being vague. It sounds so simple, but it does come back to that over and over again. Like when you say something vague, it doesn't mean anything. And maybe that's part of the reason people use such vague phrases is because it is left up to interpretation. Like you can't think there's anything wrong with building towards a sustainable future, but really the company may not be doing anything at all on the back end to do that.
there's a lot of forward-looking statements in sustainability. So they talk about committing to a greener future, or you prefer to talk about what has been done, not what people are committing to doing, because I mean, committing is a nothing word. It doesn't actually mean anything. So yeah,
That's very interesting. So kind of looking back and what have you actually done up until now and what are you doing right now instead of these future claims? I really like that because it's kind of metaphor for staying present as well.
that's true. Yeah. Like I really feel for the marketers in these positions because they're under dual pressure. They're trying to add sustainability to their marketing because they're being told that this will help. They're also being told not to say anything that will get them into trouble. So they're trying to, make the best of both worlds. And businesses are really more this year more than ever, really terrified of saying the wrong thing. And we actually know of a lot of big companies, household names that are doing a lot of great things in the climate space, investing in high quality carbon removals, doing a lot of stuff. They won't talk about it because they're so worried that these actions will be perceived poorly. So that's sort of the flip side of greenwashing that a lot of people refer to as green hushing, where you do a lot of good work and then don't talk about it. And in not talking about it, you miss out on all the benefits that come with having a strong reputation as a climate leader. But this is just brands trying to protect themselves because the space is still so uncertain about what's okay to say, what is misleading, what are we, it's just so undefined now. So a lot of them are knuckling down, sheltering down, and it is sad to see.
That is really interesting. In Europe here, we have a green claims directive that is at least says what terms you can use, which should be avoided. There's actually a number of certifications and accreditations that you can use in order to kind of prove that the work that you're doing is legit. But going back to education side, I'm curious that it just is phenomenal that, gosh, it's quite sad to see we live in the world where brands are the main storytellers, right? And from the maybe bigger perspective, consumerism perspective, like, whoa, what does it say about us as a society? And then who has that responsibility in schools, for example? I did a bit of Googling before this podcast, and what I found about, just the statistics of where people getting their climate education from. And it says that 48 to 50% of Gen Zs or Gen Zs, whatever you want to call them, get their education from social media. So
yeah,
that's
which is worrying.
Makes sense. That is worrying.
It is a challenge, I think, because the school component is absolutely necessary. And I definitely got climate change education, not a whole lot, but I got some. And I think I grew up in a generation where it was pretty much accepted. But as a society, we seem to have taken a few steps back in that regard when you look at how polarized the mainstream media is and social media. And I think, especially a lot of people in the climate space today, they really feel like the mainstream media has failed the climate debate in multiple ways. Initially it was giving equal weight to both sides when it was not an equal argument to begin with. Now it's sort of more along the lines of the doom and gloom headlines that you see every single day, which make people feel powerless to do anything. In our space specifically, it's tearing down things like carbon offsets and making it into a very black and white argument when it's not. So I think a lot of people, if they switch off from the media, from all the doom and gloom, then the only place left might be, either social media, which is also a lot of doom and gloom, or for a more positive element, you have brands coming out and talking about what they're doing as a solution, which could be a good thing. But as we've said, it can also lack nuance. So it's a tough space.
Well, it makes me think of, have you guys seen that meme where it's like people can identify like this many brands, but they can't identify like oak tree leaves and maple tree leaves and things like that? That's what it makes me think of. So it makes sense that like all these people, like, yeah, they are like, brands are what they're exposed to the most. It's what they know, and it's what they like, what they're familiar with and what they come into contact with every day. And like, of course, that's where they're sort of downloading their information from, rather than from alternative spaces that aren't so in their face all the time.
Sure. Yeah, I see that meme very, very clearly.
It's so sad.
It is sad. It is sad. But we are here trying to do something positive, and I think it will be important, one day looking back and remembering those conversations and remembering our effort, to do something. But on a more positive note, you helped brands stand out as category leaders in climate tech. And can you share a successful story where you feel like you communicated the brand's value in the climate tech space, and what do you think made that project successful?
Yeah, so one of the nice things about being in the climate space is that even though there is competition, it's often quite friendly competition. Now, that doesn't necessarily hold true, I think, for all of the climate tech verticals that exist, because there are a number of them. But if we take, for example, Meg and I are really passionate about carbon markets, so carbon removals and carbon offsets, and we work with a lot of clients in this space. And if we just take last year as an example, I don't know, Daiva, if you were following all the controversies, but it was a tough year for carbon markets. It was not pleasant. The mainstream media went after them really hard. The public got really upset about it. And the really wonderful people working in this space were honestly devastated. And there was just a lot of miscommunication. And so we worked with a lot of brands in carbon markets last year. We still do. We noticed that a lot of our clients last year, they weren't so concerned about differentiation. They weren't so concerned about trying to be the category leader. It turned into more of a, how can we build back this category as a whole?
Right.
So, which is a kind of an interesting challenge as a marketer, because you're told to focus on what makes you unique, what's your USP, how do you do it better than everyone else? Mm-hmm. In this case, it was just really selling the solution, the market as a whole. We sort of identified what was missing in the mainstream media, which is a lack of nuance and an understanding of the science. So we would work really, really closely with in-house scientific experts, figure out sort of what was missing in the mainstream conversation and even just the broader corporate conversation, because you have a lot of people in sustainability teams who might understand climate science, or they might have just been sort of thrust into this role, but there's a good chance they don't understand the real technicalities of carbon removals and carbon offsets. Like it's a whole new world. Mm-hmm. So even just translating that for them, we worked really closely with scientists, and we got to the point where now some of the content that we've written for these brands is shared by their competitors, like quote unquote competitors, to their prospects, because the content itself is just so genuinely helpful, and it's not trying to shove a product in anyone's face, that you have competitors sharing each other's content because it's so genuinely helpful. So that's the kind of, those are the kind of stories that we love, the outcomes that we love, because it really did lift up the whole market rather than you trying to, create a monopoly in a certain space. So,
and would you say the success of that content was educating the science behind it, introducing the complexity of offsets or carbon markets in general?
It probably makes sense if I was to send you the content, but what it does is it takes us what seems like a black and white argument, opens up the complexity, but then also simplifies it so that people can understand the complexity, and more than understand it, understand how to move forward. Because that's what last year, a lot of companies just stopped buying offsets and removals altogether because they were so concerned about the state of the market that they stopped investing at all. And our goal was to not have people do that, because there are going to be consequences for that. And we really do need investments in high quality offsets and removals. So our goal was to break open this complex topic, but also show them a very clear path forward.
I definitely saw in carbon offset argument that, well, you're not even allowed, well, not allowed, well, you're not advised, it's not recommended to use the term carbon offsets and climate contribution now. And then working in other languages here in Europe, when I would translate it to other languages, it becomes, it kind of adds an extra layer of complexity. And then if you translate it word by word, actually in some languages, it doesn't even make sense. So then I went through this process of trying to understand how can I not use the word offset, and then kind of went round into actually I'm going to just use the word because there's a knowledge and people know what we mean by saying an offset. But what do you think about that? Because I think there's still a bit of I don't know, it's unclear because offset can also be misleading. So what do we do?
Yeah, I probably misspoke. I shouldn't have been saying offsets throughout because I agree with you. I've never been a fan of the word. And I also toyed with contributions a while ago, but that felt to me more of a weasel word than anything, because what is a climate contribution, you know? I prefer to stick with carbon credits. But then these days, because the market is moving so quickly, we do need to distinguish between removals credits and avoidance credits, which a lot of people are now calling offsets. But yeah, technically, credits as an umbrella is probably the better term, at least in my opinion.
It's so complicated for people because it's like this already kind of difficult thing to understand. And then you throw this like language barrier on top of it where people have, and you do need to be very specific about your language, and it matters which words you choose. And we're big proponents of that. But it's hard when you also have this, well, carbon offsets isn't the right word to use anymore. And it's like, so the whole phrase gets demonized, and then I feel like people even start to be a little bit afraid to even talk about what they're doing. Like maybe they are investing in like credible carbon offsets, but they don't even want to talk about it because they heard that offsets aren't a good word to use anymore.
But going back to us as marketers, and what would you say to a marketer maybe who's interested in working and finding their role in climate tech specifically?
So Amelia and I have talked about this in the past, and I think our best advice would be to like not get too stressed about not having a climate background if they don't have it, because really the climate space, climate tech especially, really is overall still a new category. It's starting to be more established, but most of the people in climate tech are new to climate tech because that's just the nature of the space. So our advice would be, it's really valuable to pull on the skill sets that you already have. And really, I think it can be a plus for you, because instead of leaning on your like really passionate, like save the world, like we had to fix the climate crisis, like what's the word I'm looking for, agenda, which is a fantastic agenda to have, obviously, we all have it. But when you're able to lean on more hard skills, like your B2B marketing skills, like that's what climate tech really needs at the end of the day. They need to like accurately communicate and talk about what they're doing in compelling ways with like story-driven narratives that people can resonate with. But it has to relate back to, it can't just be all about climate. It has to be about what their product does that will help the B2B space do their jobs better, because that's the only way that people are going to buy into these products in the climate tech space, at least. So I'd say really like focusing on the hard skills that you do actually have. And then also you do need to catch up on the climate science knowledge, of course, but I think like having those other skills to lean back on are actually a plus for you when you're trying to like switch from a more general space to the climate tech space.
Honestly, for climate tech specifically as well, I would say it's really helpful to get up to speed with the corporate sustainability space. I've actually met with a lot of people who come out of climate science degrees and they go to work in sustainability teams, and they're actually still completely unprepared because what you learn in a climate science degree is not necessarily your day-to-day role in a corporate sustainability team. It's a whole new world of regulations and compliance and like business objectives, and yeah, having that sort of that corporate perspective on things is really helpful too. And it's, even if you're working at a climate tech startup, it's helpful to understand that space because those are your clients. That's who you're selling to.
I think I agree. Also, when I started, you start with building the skills, and I was always involved with environmental, more like advocacy campaigning. I've come from quite a hardcore activist background, so it's a different reality. But then again, the messaging that we used to use in probably more radical movements, it paralyzes people and it doesn't really inspire action sometimes. So I definitely see that climate communication is changing, focusing more on like, right, okay, but what are we actually doing now, today, and what are the solutions we're focusing, and not so much on the doom and gloom.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
One of the things we like to lean into is no doom and gloom. We like to keep things light and bright.
Because that works, right?
If you've got a short space to convey something, then light and bright seems to work, especially in the climate tech space where optimism really is the driving force here. We're trying to solve this problem. But, the longer form content that we create from an education perspective, you definitely need to get into the consequences and the negatives and what's wrong with the situation. But optimism as a whole seems to work better, end on a positive note. If you leave people feeling hopeless, there's a ton of psychology research that shows that they would just tune out and not do anything.
Some of the brands feel a lot of fear and pressure of not wanting to communicate the good work that they do because of the certain consequences that might come up. Other brands are maybe sharing too much and doing it in a bad way. Where do you see the future in terms of brands being climate educators going? Where do you think we're heading?
It's complex. I really hope, for the brand's sake, especially from a B2C perspective, I really hope they get clarity on what they can and can't say about their climate action, because a lot of them are taking steps, but there's just so much confusion, and it varies depending on where you are, and a lot of brands are multinational, so it's so confusing. And I really hope that we get some kind of universal standard that makes brands feel confident in what they're saying, so that we can clamp down on a lot of this misleading greenwashing, whether it's intentional or not, and so that brands have the confidence to actually talk about what they're doing. And hopefully within that, we see marketers closing the skill gaps. Maybe marketers, one of their key functions is getting up to speed on climate science, or working really closely with sustainability teams so that what they're putting out there really is accurate. Meg and I were just talking about this the other day, because there was, I think, another Microsoft scandal or something. When each time when one of your heroes, not that Microsoft is a hero necessarily, but when some famous person gets cancelled, and you just think, oh, really, another one? And it makes you sad personally, because you really looked up to them. And in our case, there are a lot of great corporate leaders on climate, but when things like this come out, that someone's been a great leader in one space, but it turns out they've been investing in oil and gas on the side, or they have a huge AI footprint, it does undermine that leadership, because people think, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't look to Microsoft for what they're doing, even if what they are doing in a lot of cases is really good stuff. It's undermined by these other actions that are taking. I mean, we'd hope to see the leaders kind of get even more clear on what they're doing, and sort of bring a bit more integrity to their actions and their leadership. And then hopefully more brands are following in their footsteps, and if these bigger brands can give them the confidence to do so, then we really hope. I don't see anything bad about B2B brands being climate leaders, because we know that the private sector needs to decarbonize. So if they have role models that they can look to, then that's a great thing.
I think the private sector, kind of think of it like, is the private sector going to lead this, or is the government going to lead this? And I think we've seen the answer, and that we really believe in the power of the private sector to do so. Primarily because we know that governments are slow to catch up. The private sector kind of has to be the one to do it, right? And I also think they have an advantage because they have the opportunity to take bigger risks and like get creative with their messaging and talk about these exciting projects that they're doing. And if they can, as Amelia was saying, converge like their good actions that they're doing over here in one department, and they get more aligned on like the not so great things that they do on the other side, it doesn't negate the good things that we're doing. So I guess in the future, we're just hoping to see more convergence or unity, and like them actually taking advantage of the power they have to inspire people that look up to them every day, because like it or not, that's sort of the situation that we're in, and they need to use that power carefully and responsibly.
Very much so. Such huge power, so much exposure, millions of people, 1,000 views every day. It's very, very big numbers. I also would like to bring another perspective there, kind of more grassroots approach, and small companies and startups and small to medium scale companies. I think here in Conscious Marketing Movement, we really feel like we have the power as small companies to also change and contribute to the dialogue. And kind of forget sometimes about these big companies and say, well, how can we as people with smaller budgets can contribute? Because it's all good and nice to be talking about giants like Microsoft or Amazon or Google, but their game is very different to, I guess, what we're playing, what Climate Hub is.
That's true. You do need leaders at each sort of level and scale, because if a 10-person company looks at what Microsoft is doing and thinks, well, okay, we can't afford 100 or 500, whatever the crazy amount that they're paying for carbon removals right now, that's not an option for us. So sometimes they need other examples that they can follow.
And to end our conversation, the last question is what keeps you going every day when you wake up, work with your clients? What keeps you going?
I think for me, the best thing about working in climate tech is that all of our clients are genuinely really, really good people. You know what I mean? Like, especially when I first started out, I would get so excited to be talking to like these like people that are my age that were like ex Google or ex Shopify or whatever they were doing. And now they're like commercializing this direct air capture unit that they made in their backyard. You know what I mean? And now they're in like the pilot phase and they're scaling it up to like do their best to combat the climate crisis. And when I first started out, I just thought it was so cool to be talking to people like that one-on-one every day. Like, because I'm not doing any science projects in my backyard. I'm just helping them like communicate what they do more compellingly and with accuracy. So I think just remembering that the people we work with every day are doing such incredible technological like feats of amazingness every day. I think that's just really inspiring. And that's what keeps me excited from day to day.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, that's so true, Meg. I recently, I've always been a bit of a pessimist, but recently read some books and decided that I'm now an optimist, which I truly believe is a choice that a person can make. And honestly, being in climate tech, I think part of the reason it's so uplifting, even though it's really challenging, is it's filled with so much optimism. I mean, who goes and spends years of their life building a carbon capture plant or, working on these niche solutions if they don't have optimism that this is actually going to work and that this is worth saving? So yeah, it's a great vibe being here.
It is true when you meet someone who's like, oh, right, look what I'm creating. This is going to do this and then XYZ. How can you help me? And then you go into these conversations and you feel like you can support them with your skills, with our marketing skills. They're contributing with their skills. It definitely fires me up and keeps me going. Well, thank you so much, Meg. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you for the work that you're doing in climate tech and marketing, and also supporting us in conscious marketing movement, trying for us to spread the word about conscious marketing practices, to find that specificity, to pay attention to the language that we choose, and to inspire brands to have that courage to communicate the positive impact. Because that's if they don't talk what they do, then what's the point? And we are here to support these brands and support also those marketers in this space that care about the state of our world and want to contribute with their skills. So thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And if you would like to learn more about what is conscious marketing and join the community of entrepreneurs and change makers, marketers, head to consciousmarketingmovement.com and join the membership.